Okay, so today we're going to talk about residential condo sales and new construction sales here in South Florida. Even though I'm the commercial director for one of the commercial directors for this office here in the Miami Coral Gables office, I thought it was important to share what was happening in South Florida, and South Florida being Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County, because whatever is happening in new construction and residential obviously affects both sides. So that being said, I thought it was important to share with you guys a little bit of what's happening and explain maybe some of the demand that we have, as well as some of the new construction and maybe some of the bad press that South Florida is getting. Now, as far as new construction is concerned, what we're seeing here in South Florida is a bit of a dichotomy between the traditional sales and the short-term rentals. The stuff that is in the pink color is the traditional sales versus the blue, which are the short-term sales. So there's a lot of buildings that are going up already with the intent of having the services in place, so you can buy the condo and at the same time you could have the short-term rental service of the building manage all of that for you. Pretty good investment. Interesting what you can buy. They can be as small as, I would say, a hotel room to 2, 3, 4 bedroom suites. So again, differences that you can get, and it can be long-term, regular term, or it can be short-term. And again, most of this is happening in the Dade and Broward area, not so much in the Palm Beach area. Now, as far as what we've seen in supply, we've seen 3 cycles since 2000. The first cycle from 2000 to 2010, we've had a lot of new construction, almost 60,000 units, which is when we had the crash in 2008, somewhere thereabouts. Now, when that happened, we were still left with a lot of units that needed to be delivered. The talk in the media was that it was going to take over 10 years to get that stuff stabilized. Well, that didn't happen. It only took about 24 months before all those units were sold and stabilized within that same market. Since then, we've gone into the 2010-2020 cycle, where we had a little under 20,000 units that were brought to market. Most of those have been already sold and stabilized. So we kind of established that that's the number that we need in every cycle, every 10-year cycle, to meet the demand of South Florida. This cycle, we are at roughly 12,600 units. Now, it almost looks like we're on track if you look at the pre-construction stuff that is slated. However, what is actually in construction is about a little over 4,000 units. Now, that being said, obviously there's a shortage of supply there. Those units will not be delivered for another 1 to 3 years that we're going to see those units. And this is just going to lead into more of a supply issue, not being able to keep up with the demand that we have here in South Florida. And with that cycle, then we also break it down into price per unit. Now, the bulk of the stuff that is trading anywhere from 500,000 to $1.5 million, that seems to be, I guess, the most of them that are out there selling. And I think that is representative of South Florida itself, the people that live and work here for the most part. The other stuff, that other big line, anywhere from $1.5 million to 70 million plus, again, that is our luxury market. And most of this stuff is happening east of I-95. And that interstate runs about a half mile from the bay on the south end and half mile from the shore, because the barrier islands are taken away as you go further north into Broward County. So again, we do have a luxury market on the east side of I-95. And again, 85% of those sales are from $500,000 to $1.5 million in those condos. Now, if we go into the condo sales, the other part of this is we have seen a trend where we have seen an increase in inventory. Now, I want to give you some backstory on this. The inventory has gone up for units or buildings that are older than 30 years in age. Why is that? Because of the issue that we recently had with the Champlain Towers. The building code has been very stringent. We had a 40-year certification, which is now reduced to a 30-year. What that means is every 30 years now, the building, or at the first 30 years, the building will need to be recertified by an architect or an engineer. And once that happens, then it's every 10 years after that, again, to make sure that the building is up to code and we don't have any incidents. So what we've had an incident in is buildings that are over 30 years old. They've climbed from 2001, where we had 9,342, now they're over 20,000 units that are 30 years or older, simply because those the older buildings are not built to the newer code and they don't have the reserves in place. So we're starting to see a lot of special assessments for some of those older buildings that didn't have the reserves in place, and that's causing a lot of the push out. So people are deciding to get out of those units. That is creating a little bit of some additional inventory, and I think some opportunities for anybody that is looking to get into this area. Now, granted, you don't want to run into those buildings without doing a lot of due diligence and some forethought. So I think there's opportunities, you obviously want to look into these. And again, this is all due to the mandatory regulations of construction, as well as having the reserves in place so you don't have any special assessment issues. And again, the stuff that is over 30 years old, you can see that we've got, a big chunk of those of our surplus of our supply right now. It represents 80, as well as of the beginning of the year, it represented 86% of the supply that was actually in the MLS. The newer stuff sells off relatively quickly, doesn't have any issues. So anything that is less than 30 years old, again, is again, we have a lot of that stuff on the market, and you can see it there. Under 30 years old, 2,700. Over 30 years, 17,000 in supply. And again, it represents 86% of our supply side. Now, the other stuff, the other condos that are newer and they're in the range of $500,000 to $1.5 million, the bulk of those are in Miami-Dade County. As a matter of fact, when we started this research, all of it was in Miami-Dade. There was 0 in Broward and 0 in Palm Beach. Granted, Broward and Palm Beach do have some of the luxury stuff, just not some of the stuff for the regular people living here. Another phenomenon that is coming back to South Florida is the condo conversion, where they take an older apartment building and they convert it into condominiums. This helps or alleviates some of the supply side in terms of sales. However, at the same time, it does take some of the rental units off of the market. Those were two major ones that we had here in South Florida. And going back into demand, why does South Florida have such a high demand for some of these properties? Well, we just surpassed 23 million people here in South Florida. Why is that? And I'll stop it here. Last year, when they did the numbers on a day-by-day, or divided by the number of days, we had an average of 1,280 people moving into the state of Florida, and that's what's driving our demand. Again, at one point we were even with Texas, and as Texas, as you all know, is probably 3 or 4 times our size. So when we're matching them in terms of people moving in, you know that there's a high demand in this area, especially in the South Florida, where we're only about maybe 15, maybe 20 miles in from the coast because of the Everglades. So we've got the Atlantic Ocean to one side and the Everglades to the other side, and obviously the other bay, or the south end, which is more water. So we don't have any more land to go into. When you have this many people moving in, there's some opportunities. If you'd like to find out more about this stuff, reach out to me. If you know an agent, reach out to them directly. And if you don't, call us. We'll be happy to connect you with one of the residential agents, the specialists in this area.